The FDA just cleared the first AI that reads burn wounds. Welcome to medAI Times Podcast, your daily update on medical AI. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Imagine a patient arrives in the emergency department with, severe burns. For decades, the most sophisticated tool a trauma surgeon had to predict how that tissue would heal was, well, their own eyes.
Yeah, literally just looking at it.
Exactly. Looking at the wound, guessing the depth, and making a highly subjective call based on past experience. But this week, the FDA fundamentally changed that medical reality.
They really did.
We're looking at a stack of sources today that prove artificial intelligence has definitively moved from the realm of white papers and, hypothetical data centers directly to the patient's bedside.
Right, it's actual clinical practice now.
Yeah. And to map out how this massive shift is happening for you, I'm just going to fire off the top 10 headlines from our sources in a single breath to set the stage.
Yep.
Ready?
Yeah, let's hear the map.
Okay, here we go. FDA grants de novo clearance to burn reading AI. Eli Lilly puts $500 million into a Korean AI lab. QIAGEN and NVIDIA team up on AI drug discovery. Bristol Myers Squibb rolls Claude to 30,000 staff. Abu Dhabi and J&J launch AI surgical network. Artera takes multimodal cancer AI to ASCO. Twin Health launches AI for GLP-1 stewardship. A Lancet study finds ChatGPT discharge summaries boost patients. Claude adds 28 security and compliance tools. And DeepMind hires 20 researchers from Contextual AI.
Okay, wow. That list it paints a very distinct picture.
Right.
We're definitely no longer talking about generic consumer chatbots composing emails here. I mean, this is hyper-specific clinical integration and massive regulated enterprise infrastructure.
Which brings us back to that emergency department scenario. The FDA just granted a de novo clearance to Spectral AI for a device called DeepView.
Yeah, DeepView.
It's the first artificial intelligence burn wound assessment system.
And the clinical context is really what makes this a watershed moment. When someone suffers a severe burn, assessing the depth of that tissue damage within the first, say, 72 hours is notoriously difficult.
It's mostly guesswork, right?
Exactly. The baseline accuracy for visual assessment is shockingly low.
Yeah.
Even for highly specialized burn surgeons.
Wow.
Yeah, looking at the surface of a wound and trying to predict if the deeper layers of skin will survive and regenerate, it's an educated guess at best.
And getting that subjective guess wrong has brutal consequences for the patient.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Overestimate the severity, and the patient undergoes unnecessary surgical excision.
So the surgeon literally cuts away tissue that might have healed perfectly fine on its own.
Right. But then, if you underestimate the severity, you delay skin grafting. And that leads to a massive increase in infection risk, terrible scarring, prolonged hospital stays.
So DeepView replaces that visual guesswork with, an objective quantitative reading right at the bedside.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have a spotlight in our sources on the underlying technique they're using here, which is multispectral imaging. For anyone unfamiliar, it feels like standard AI development right now is entirely focused on just, reading more books, shoving more text into larger language models.
Yeah, bigger LLMs.
Right. But DeepView takes a totally different path. It's entirely about building a better eye, a biological sensor that sees beyond human physical capability.
That's a great way to put it. Because a regular camera, like the one in your smartphone, captures light in 3 standard channels: red, green, and blue.
The RGB channels.
Right. Multispectral imaging captures reflectance across multiple, very narrow wavelength bands that the human eye physically cannot perceive.
So they're looking straight through the epidermis to measure the underlying physiological state of the tissue.
Yes. It measures the actual biological activity.
Okay.
The sensor is picking up on perfusion.
Perfusion.
Yeah, the microscopic blood flow within the capillary beds, as well as oxygenation levels and early chemical markers of cellular necrosis.
Wow. And then DeepView takes that invisible multispectral data and maps it against a proprietary database, which, the sources say, contains over 340 billion pixels of documented burn imagery.
That scale is just staggering. 340 billion pixels of outcomes.
Yeah.
So the algorithm processes the image in about 20 seconds, and it predicts with intense accuracy which specific centimeters of the wound will fail to heal within 21 days and will therefore require surgical intervention.
That's incredible. And we cannot gloss over the regulatory milestone here either. It received a de novo clearance from the FDA.
Yeah, that's huge.
Because for those who don't spend their free time reading medical device regulations, the FDA generally uses a pathway called the 510K.
Right.
That essentially means a company can prove their new gadget is substantially equivalent to a device that's already legally on the market. It's like a regulatory fast pass lane.
But de novo means there is no predicate. There's no equivalent device anywhere on Earth.
So the FDA had to establish a completely new device category.
Yeah. Exactly. A new device category and a new set of safety standards for multispectral imaging combined with machine learning in trauma care. Because nobody has successfully done this before.
And this theme of, utilizing algorithms to make highly specific predictions about human tissue isn't isolated to burn trauma. We're seeing the exact same conceptual leap happening in oncology.
Oh, absolutely.
Moving from predicting how healthy tissue heals to predicting how tumors respond to aggressive treatment.
Yeah.
Artera is presenting some groundbreaking abstracts at the ASCO 2026 annual meeting.
Yeah, so Artera is showcasing multimodal AI for breast cancer prognosis,
Right.
specifically focusing on chemotherapy benefit stratification.
Let's clarify that terminology for a second. Multimodal simply means the system is processing multiple different types of data simultaneously, right?
Right. In this instance, it's analyzing digital pathology alongside the patient's clinical history.
Okay.
And what's fascinating here is that this multimodal software is going head-to-head against established physical genomic assays.
Tools like Oncotype DX.
Exactly.
And to appreciate why this is a massive shift, we have to detail what a wet lab actually involves. Currently, if a patient has node-positive, hormone receptor-positive breast cancer, determining if they actually need harsh chemotherapy requires a massive physical, logistical process.
Very involved.
Yeah. A piece of the tumor is biopsied, preserved in formalin, shipped across the country to a specialized facility, mixed with chemical reagents, and genetically sequenced over a period of weeks. I mean, it costs thousands of dollars.
And oncologists rely on those physical molecular tests to make the final call. If the genomic profile suggests the tumor won't respond to chemo anyway, you spare the patient the extreme toxicity of the treatment.
Right.
But Artera's research suggests their algorithm can just look at the high-resolution digital flight of the tumor, analyze the microscopic morphological pattern.
Think of the spatial arrangement of the cells.
Yeah, the arrangement of the cells, the density of the stroma, the shape of the nuclei, layer in the patient's age and clinical data, and make that exact same stratification decision.
So software is competing directly with the wet lab. No shipping tissue, no expensive chemical reagents, just an instant digital analysis that fundamentally compresses the timeline and cost structure of cancer care.
It's wild. But, the impact of artificial intelligence is also extending far beyond the walls of the clinic or the pathology lab.
Right.
The technology is actively reshaping how patients manage their own chronic conditions once they go home.
Yes, we have a fascinating randomized controlled trial published in the Lancet Digital Health that perfectly illustrates this. Researchers at Helios University Hospital Wuppertal took GPT-4o and used it to generate patient-facing discharge summaries.
Which is such a cool application.
Yeah, and then they ran a clinical trial comparing them to standard hospital discharge paperwork. The study found the AI-generated summaries significantly improved the PAM-13 measure.
Right. The PAM-13, or Patient Activation Measure. It basically evaluates how well a patient understands their role in the care process and their confidence in managing their health post-discharge.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this metric for a second.
Sure.
Is the PAM-13 just like a subjective survey where patients check a box saying, I feel good about my doctor today? Or does a higher score actually change medical reality? Like, does a better written piece of paper prevent someone from ending up back in the emergency room?
It absolutely changes the medical reality.
Really?
Yeah, clinical validation of the PAM-13 shows that highly activated patients have significantly lower readmission rates and better long-term outcomes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about the standard discharge summary. It's notoriously terrible. It's written by an exhausted physician, primarily for the billing department or the primary care doctor, and it's just filled with dense jargon.
Right, it says things like monitor for peripheral edema, continue beta blocker, follow-up cardiology PRN.
Exactly. The patient reads that, gets completely overwhelmed, and throws it in a drawer.
Yeah, and then they miss their medication.
Right. Their condition exacerbates, and they're back in a hospital bed a week later. Medical noncompliance is a massive driver of mortality.
Right.
So what the AI does in this study is translate that dense clinical reasoning into an actionable, step-by-step, tailored guide based on the patient's actual health literacy. And the fact that this is a peer-reviewed, randomized controlled trial means we have proof of a measurable outcome effect.
So treating patient communication as a rigorous medical intervention actually works.
It really does.
Speaking of post-discharge stewardship, the sheer financial weight of managing chronic conditions brings us to Twin Health and their work with GLP-1
Oh,
medications.
this is a big one.
Drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy are dominating healthcare right now because of their weight loss and diabetes applications, but they are incredibly expensive for insurance companies to cover indefinitely.
Yeah, payers and pharmacy benefit managers are facing multi-billion-dollar liabilities right now.
And this raises an important question about how we currently prescribe these things, doesn't it?
It does. This raises an important question because the current prescribing mechanism is a blunt instrument. You're either authorized for the maximum dose or you're cut off completely.
Right.
Insurers desperately want a safe way to titrate these drugs. Finding the minimum effective dose or tapering patients off entirely while somehow maintaining the metabolic benefits.
So how does a piece of software actually solve this mathematically? Twin Health is building what they call a metabolic twin.
Yeah.
They're ingesting massive streams of data from continuous glucose monitors, smart scales, and blood lab results.
And it models the biological physics of your specific body. GLP-1s work by delaying gastric emptying and signaling satiety to the brain.
Okay.
So by mapping your real-time glucose spikes against your exact food intake and the half-life of the medication, the system identifies your unique metabolic threshold.
So instead of a physician blindly guessing if it's safe to lower your dose by a few milligrams, the digital twin simulates the outcome?
Exactly. It acts as a continuous stewardship layer. It guides the dose escalation and maps out a precise tapering strategy that prevents the patient from rebounding.
I mean, if an insurance company can pay a fraction of a cent for server compute to safely have a $1,000 a month prescription cost, that software becomes the standard policy overnight.
Oh, without a doubt. But, relying on an algorithm to manage someone's physical medication dosage or rewriting an entire hospital's discharge documentation introduces a massive liability.
Yeah, you cannot run that kind of high-stakes infrastructure on a consumer web browser.
No, the healthcare sector requires completely locked down sovereign data environments.
Which is exactly the bottleneck Anthropic just cleared with their new Claude Compliance API. They rolled out 28 enterprise security integrations.
Right.
We're looking at native hooks into CrowdStrike, Microsoft Purview, Wiz, Okta, Zscaler.
It provides the missing governance layer for hospital IT and pharmaceutical compliance officers. It exposes every chat prompt, every uploaded file, and all platform activity directly to the security stacks these enterprises already use.
For things like identity management and data loss prevention, or DLP. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like hiring 30,000 genius interns, but previously you had no ID badges or security cameras for them.
That's a perfect analogy.
The Compliance API provides that governance layer. It's like building a universal translator for the most complex regulatory and scientific language on Earth, but operating it entirely inside a Faraday cage. Nothing leaks out. Everything is monitored.
Right. If an employee tries to paste an unreleased chemical formula into a prompt, the DLP system catches it instantly.
And the moment that Compliance API went live, Bristol Myers Squibb announced they're deploying Claude to roughly 30,000 employees across research, manufacturing, and clinical trials.
The return on investment for embedding a governed model at that scale is staggering.
Yeah.
Especially for clinical trial documentation.
Oh, I bet.
When a pharmaceutical company runs a phase 3 trial, synthesizing the clinical study reports is arguably the most painful information extraction job in the industry.
Why is that?
You have highly paid scientists spending months manually combing through tens of thousands of pages of adverse event logs just to draft regulatory submissions.
So having an AI securely structure and summarize that documentation compresses the timeline materially.
Bringing a blockbuster drug to market even 4 weeks earlier is worth tens of millions of dollars.
Wow. But governance solves the software deployment issue. You still have the problem of raw training data. If you want to train an algorithm to assist in complex physical procedures, you need massive amounts of diverse telemetry.
And hospital data is notoriously siloed.
Right. Which is why the announcement out of the Middle East is so fascinating. Abu Dhabi launched an AI-enabled surgical network in partnership with J&J's Polyphonic.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical challenge with surgical AI is that it requires highly standardized operating room data from multiple sites.
What kind of data?
You need surgical video, the kinematic telemetry of the robotic arms, the exact angle, pressure, and speed of the instruments. and patient outcomes from hundreds of different surgeons to prevent the model from becoming biased toward one specific hospital's techniques.
Oh, I see. But getting a health system in New York to seamlessly share raw surgical video with a clinic in London is an absolute nightmare of privacy laws and incompatible server architecture.
Exactly. But Abu Dhabi completely sidesteps the silo problem through sheer government mandate. They're tying operating rooms from the Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, Pure Health, MediClinic, and others onto a single sovereign-scale surgical data layer built by J&J.
So when the regulator itself builds the digital highway and forces interoperability, the friction vanishes.
It establishes a centralized hub where every robotic movement and surgical outcome can be aggregated securely to train the next generation of autonomous surgical tools.
Now, Abu Dhabi is pooling the data, but data is only half the equation. You still need the underlying algorithmic architecture to process it into new treatments and procedures.
Right.
Which brings us to the intense arms race happening at the frontier labs right now. Google just shipped a suite of science-focused AI tools directly on their Gemini platform, productizing things like multi-paper synthesis and hypothesis generation.
They're essentially trying to build an AI co-scientist as an out-of-the-box product.
Yeah. But while Google releases software, their DeepMind division is quietly executing a massive talent acquisition. They just spent $80 to $90 million to acqui-hire over 20 researchers from a company called Contextual AI.
That's a huge move.
So what does this all mean? Why are the biggest tech conglomerates on Earth hoarding specialized researchers instead of just buying successful startup products?
Because the researchers at Contextual AI specialize in something called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Okay.
This is currently the hardest problem to solve in enterprise AI.
Let's break down what RAG actually means under the hood.
So standard AI models operate like a student taking a closed book exam. They generate answers based entirely on whatever information they memorized during their initial training. Sometimes, if they don't know the answer, they confidently hallucinate one.
Which is bad.
Very bad. RAG changes the system to an open book test. It forces the AI to securely retrieve facts from an external verified database, like a pharmaceutical company's proprietary chemical library, before it generates a response.
And in the pharmaceutical industry, a hallucination isn't just an embarrassing typo. If an AI hallucinates a chemical interaction or invents a non-existent protein structure, it could derail a billion-dollar clinical pipeline.
Exactly. Ensuring the model stays perfectly grounded in verified data is incredibly difficult engineering. Frontier Labs realized that to win the lucrative scientific enterprise market, they don't want a startup's early-stage app. They want specific human brains capable of solving the hallucination problem so they can bake that capability directly into their foundational models.
That makes total sense. And pharmaceutical giants are not just sitting back waiting for Silicon Valley to hand them finished platforms either. Eli Lilly just committed $500 million to open Gateway Lab Korea. They're providing local biotech startups and academic labs with physical wet lab space, combined with direct access to Lilly's proprietary AI drug discovery platform.
And concurrently, you have QIAGEN partnering with NVIDIA to embed BioNeMo.
What's BioNeMo?
It's a suite of generative models capable of predicting complex protein structures and molecular binding affinities. They're putting it directly into the bioinformatics dashboards that researchers already use daily.
So synthesizing Lilly's massive investment with the QIAGEN and NVIDIA partnership reveals the new blueprint for drug discovery. We're looking at the pipeline feeder model.
Yeah, the field of computational biology is simply too vast for any single pharmaceutical company to invent everything internally.
Right.
Instead, they act as the ecosystem sponsor. Big Pharma provides the supercomputing power, the capital, and the advanced molecular algorithms to a decentralized network of agile startups.
And those smaller, highly specialized teams do the heavy lifting of exploring novel biological targets and moving from a theoretical variant to an actual drug candidate.
Exactly. And once a startup finds a promising hit using the provided infrastructure, the pharmaceutical giant is perfectly positioned to absorb the asset and fund the massive clinical trials required to bring it to market.
It creates a decentralized discovery engine fueled by highly centralized compute and capital. That is fascinating.
It really is.
Well, to recap the terrain we've covered today, we started with a world where artificial intelligence in healthcare felt entirely theoretical. Now we're witnessing it mature into bulletproof, governed infrastructure capable of securely managing workflows for 30,000 pharmaceutical researchers.
Right.
We're seeing it power brand new classes of multispectral physical sensors, like Spectral AI's DeepView. And perhaps most importantly, we're seeing peer-reviewed proof that these algorithmic tools are fundamentally improving how patients recover in their own homes.
It is a remarkable acceleration. But, to leave you with something to consider long after we wrap up, let's return to our starting point with Spectral AI and their de novo clearance.
Okay.
We discussed how rigorous that FDA regulatory bar is to clear a static medical device. But consider the fundamental nature of neural networks. They learn.
Right, that's the whole point.
As a device like DeepView is deployed across hundreds of trauma centers, constantly analyzing new variations of burn tissue and aggregating more outcome data, the mathematical weights within the algorithm are designed to update and refine themselves.
Oh, wow.
So how exactly does a regulatory body govern a medical device that fundamentally alters its own diagnostic logic after it has already been approved? We are rapidly approaching a horizon where the FDA may literally need to build its own sovereign, continuously analyzing AI models just to evaluate and keep pace with the medical AI it's attempting to regulate.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. See you tomorrow.